Welcome to the Hidden Podcast, where we simplify cybersecurity and all things tech for those of you who, like me, need it to be explained without all the jargon. So if you've ever wondered why you still feel vulnerable even though you've bought all the fancy tools, you've come to the right place. I'm your host, Lynn, and my job is to take one of our resident experts and help them translate their cyber expertise into plain English. This means having practical conversations, usually built around Babbel's hidden cybersecurity framework, which we break down in the show. Or sometimes we'll take a hot topic in the tech industry, like a major breach or a new legislation, and we'll explain how we help you stay ahead. Basically, this podcast exists so that you can sleep well at night, preferably not during the podcast. Joining me in the virtual studio today is none other than Adam Bearder, the creator of Hidden, you guys. So exciting. So thank you for being here, Adam.
Thank you for having me, Lynn. Pleasure to be here.
So before we dive into the nitty-gritty of the episode, Adam,
Sure.
Do you mind telling our friends listening or watching out there a bit about yourself in terms of what you do and where you live?
Absolutely, yeah. So, as I said, Adam Bearder. My main role here at Babbel is a product manager for cybersecurity. I have the wonderful responsibility of the relationship management for our partners in the cybersecurity space, and also how we actually sort of build our go-to-market offerings, the products and services that wrap around it, and where unique sort of assets sit for Babbel and ultimately sort of what makes us different in market. So I really enjoy sort of building on that capability and function there. And yeah, really pleased with what we're doing at the moment and the direction that we're wanting to take our customers on. Based in Sheffield, or actually just outside of Sheffield in the UK. So pretty good access to most of the UK and get about to many of the Babbel offices.
Nice. Love to hear it. And you have already preemptively answered my next question, which is, what do you like most about what you do outside of creating these cool new frameworks and being a notable guest on the podcast? But yes, you've already touched on that. Okay. So today we are formally introducing the Hidden framework by addressing a little bit of an uncomfortable question, which is, if something went wrong tomorrow, do you know your weakest link or your easiest point of entry? So a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
But before we, dive into the Hidden framework, we'll start with a common scenario. So let's say a business has a firewall, they have antivirus backups, and maybe something fancy like endpoint detection response, which is also known as EDR. So on paper, they are secure, right? They have all these tools in place. But Adam, in your opinion, why would they still feel exposed?
I think it's the paper versus reality. You may have the tools, you may have the technology in place, but how do they all connect together? Do you have the right processes behind them? And I think that can often instill a little bit of a lack of confidence.
Right.
And obviously the fear around, actually, what if this happened? How do we as an organization handle those certain circumstances? And I think that is certainly what would be probably sort of top of mind for a lot of business leaders at the moment is, yeah, we've bought those technologies, but do we truly understand how to use them?
As you listening or watching out there know that this podcast is exactly about answering that question as to, I've spent an arm and a leg on cybersecurity. Why am I still feeling exposed? Why can't I sleep well at night? And that's exactly what Hidden was created to tackle, essentially.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
it's evident that the underlying issue here with these businesses that invest in all of this technology is not a lack of technology per se, right? But it's not having that structure to tie it all together, as you've just said. So this question is a two-parter. Firstly, what is tool sprawl? And then how does it increase risk rather than reducing it?
Yeah, so I think tool sprawl sort of first of all is being led in different directions via either specific advertising or sales on technologies and tools, for one. So there's so many different arms and legs of cybersecurity today,
Uh,
whether that be protecting your people, educating them, whether that be going down into how you secure your data, how do you block an entry via either firewall or detecting activities on devices. They're all individual technologies, tools, different vendors that are supplying those services. And sort of on top of that, they're producing alerts, they're producing sort of actions, remediations that need to be taken because of it. And sort of within that, it's very easy for certain areas of that to get missed. So you may
Nice.
have
Yeah.
implemented it, but what, again, to the sort of comment before, is what processes have you wrapped yourselves up around to actually ensure that you handle certain scenarios when they arise? How do those alerts make sure that they hit that individual's either inbox or
Mhm.
management tool that they're using to centrally go and say, we need to take action there and do something about either that device or what particular activity might be taking place in a certain environment.
Got you. And just to be clear, just to make sure I'm on the same page as you, when we talk about these alerts, are you referring to endpoint detection response that I had mentioned earlier?
I mean,
Is that
absolutely could be that,
okay?
but it could be as simple as some sort of alerts where an individual has clicked on a phishing link
Mm,
within an email, and then there's tools and technologies in there that would alert, let's call it an engineer or an admin, to that
right.
activity. But if no one's properly taking actions upon that,
Mm,
they're still going ahead with the
yeah.
phishing expectation of what that particular attacker was after. So
Yeah. Yeah. It's a little bit bleak, of course, when we talk about cybersecurity. It's difficult to
can
find
be,
that happy medium. But
yeah,
I mean, this is the reality of things. And I
it
love the
is.
fact that you brought up, people clicking on fishy links, because that is the very next episode when we talk about, how to ensure that your people have the right behavior and things like that. We call it human risk. But yes, that is definitely upcoming after this episode. So be sure to tune in for that one. But switching gears and coming back to this episode, we hear the word maturity thrown around all the time, especially when we talk about cybersecurity, right? So, Adam, what does this actually mean in practice?
Yeah, I'm quite careful with the word maturity. It can certainly get
Mm.
overused, and it's quite a sort of an abstract way of looking at it. But in practice, it
Mm.
effectively means a way of understanding how your exposure currently sits. How well are
Okay.
you protected in certain areas of that? And ultimately, what do you need to fix next? So, have you understood the gaps? Have you made a plan in which you think, okay, we're not very strong in that particular area, let's look to tackle that next? So that's building your maturity out, building out your cybersecurity posture. That's quite a common word as well in the industry, and ensuring that you've got those right protections in and around that.
Okay, great. All right. So we know that many businesses buy these security tools reactively. It's usually after something bad happens, like an incident or a
Yeah.
breach or due to audit pressure. So, how do these businesses move from reactive spend to more deliberate investment?
I'll take it back a little bit to the maturity. It's having that
Okay.
plan and sort of tying that together with the strategy. So I would say reactive spend is very emotional. You're doing it at the drop
Uh,
of a hat because something has happened within that. And that might mean that you buy the wrong tool. It could mean that you make a hasty decision because that feels like the right thing that's going to protect us right now for that given instance. And maybe not necessarily evaluated the bigger picture or some of the developing technologies that are maybe coming in that might be sort of two birds, one stone kind of sort of
okay.
motions that you could build that out. So having a deliberate investment would sort of mean understanding a true baseline of where you are today. And from that, you can understand what risks exist elsewhere or in other areas that you can then specifically and deliberately make a plan to invest correctly going forwards.
Nice. Okay. And we'll, of course, dive a little bit deeper into that, and especially when it comes to establishing that baseline of what good looks like, because we obviously know this technology isn't exactly a silver bullet. And cybersecurity looks different for every business, right? No two businesses are alike anyway. But those are
Mhm.
definitely great points to make. So, the moment you have all been waiting for, switching gears to hidden, right? So, we've mentioned it
Yeah.
often enough, so we might as well define it clearly. So, Adam, this is your baby, or rather your cybersecurity baby.
Yeah.
What is the hidden framework and how did it come about?
Hidden is a simple, structured way to understand how secure a business is. But ultimately, it is also an acronym. Okay. And it's an acronym for 6 critical areas that we kept hearing time after time. So we've been doing cybersecurity for many, many years here at Babel. And it was repeatedly the same 6 areas that we ultimately kept addressing with our customer base. And those specifically: human risk, identity management, data controls, disaster recovery, endpoint protection, and network and cloud security. So quite straightforward, simple words that hopefully mean something to the whole organization. So try and put it in a common language that the
Yeah.
whole business, and certainly across the SMB sector where you don't necessarily have technology experts, we can put across a nice structured framework that you can follow to ultimately ensure that you're protected and you have the right cybersecurity practices in place.
I really appreciate, just establishing this shared language that
Yeah,
everybody in the business can speak because obviously, when it comes to technology and cybersecurity, it's easy to get overwhelmed by all the tech jargon, right? So let's
certainly
take a
is.
second to
Confuses
unpack
me half
each.
the time.
Exactly, exactly. And you're in the field, right? So let's take a little bit of time to unpack each of those 6 layers. As you know, listening or watching out there, we will be unpacking each of the letters in, their own designated episodes after this one. But, for now, at a high level, Adam, do you mind just unpacking what human risk is, what identity management is, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, I'll try and keep it sort of very brief and not go into the weeds. Um, Very simply, human risk would be understanding if your people are a weak point is a great way to sort of frame it. Do you put practices in place to help educate them? I
Mm-hmm.
think it's something in the realm of just 8% of your users can actually contribute to 80% of the threat. And across organizations, there's a huge piece of actually identifying who those maybe 8 users are, or 8%. If you look at in a percentage frame, how do we
Wow.
identify them? How do we properly educate them? One area. Identity, that's really looking around access, permission. How do you control? How do you put the right practices in place? If you haven't a user leave the business, what is your process behind removing their access? How quickly can that be done? Are they a salesperson and they might be looking to take their account base elsewhere? How do you sort of lock down that permission and remove them in a timely manner that may not necessarily allow them to do anything untoward? And data controls, there's 2 flavors to data controls. There's the external, so it's sharing the data externally, and again putting the security layer around that data so that it
Okay.
controls it and it can't be shared externally. But also think about the likes of AI and AI adoption. It's on pretty much every topic of everyone's lips at the moment
Oh,
as the new technologies that are being adopted. I would absolutely implore everybody to start looking at AI and the huge efficiencies that you can benefit from it. But the ultimate question is which is the right tool? And if that tool is the right tool, how do you protect what data is put into that tool? Do you
uh,
label it correctly? Do you have the right sort of controls if it's sort of private and confidential
yeah.
data that you don't necessarily want to be put to the tool? So there's certain areas there, and there's many tools out there in the market at the moment on how to control that. But again, having that right protection around the data is critical. Disaster recovery, quite a straightforward one, this one. Most organizations will be running backups. Are you testing those backups? Do you know how to recover from the backup that you've been doing daily for the last 6 years? Have you actually ever gone, I'm going to take that backup and just see if it gets me to that point in time that I thought it would? And so many organizations don't test it. We then have the endpoint protection as mentioned, and that is really, again, a lot of organizations have been doing antivirus and the endpoint detection and response services that have been out there for many years. That's now moving towards that management. There's so many to what we were talking about, alerting coming through before. What are we doing? How are we actioning those alerts and protecting those devices? And again, just on the other side of that, are we actually patching those devices? And by patching, I mean putting the latest updates. These vendors that are running these devices, such as your, I don't know, your Lenovo's or your IBM's, the actual hardware developers in certain instances, they'll be continually running updates to their software itself, that's like their operating systems on the devices with security patches. Are you in those security patches as they come out? They've made that change for a reason. Yeah. There's layers there. And then it's network and cloud. Do you know all of the cloud applications that are hitting at your organization? Do you know
Yeah.
what access that they have to those applications? And similarly, how are they getting to those applications via the network? Do you have firewall controls? Do you permit them down certain paths to get there? And again, how well is that sort of control? So pretty common 6 areas that we see time after time, and the way in which we sort of structure this is ensuring that you've got the right sort of base level of protection and then enhancing depending on the organization and the needs that you have to
Yeah.
cover yourselves correctly for the cybersecurity standards that are.
Great points, well put as per usual. And I think what I appreciated most about you walking us through those levels is, you were also throwing in some little gems in terms of what you guys listening or watching out there can actually do to start to get this under control, whether it's making sure all your systems and applications are updated by AKA
Exactly
patching, new word over there, or,
that.
ensuring that your backups are tested. Yes, you have it in place, but let's pretend that touch wood disaster has struck and you no longer have access. What do you now have access, via what do you have access to via those backups as well is something to take note of. So thank you for that, Adam. So going back to an earlier point that you made around, the power of having this shared language, right?
Mhm.
So when a business starts using this shared language for cybersecurity across leadership and IT, what actually changes? Or put differently, how does Hidden turn that into establishing clearer ownership and governance rather than just putting more pressure on the IT team?
Okay, so I think the biggest thing that we're doing here is we're ultimately trying to put it in, like we say, the language, and the communication becomes easier for the
Mhm.
organization to adopt and also sort of communicate correctly across. But the other area is really just ensuring that you've got a measurement within that. So, okay, everyone's speaking that same language. What As we address those sort of areas that and topics that we've just sort of covered on, we can put a score towards it. You
Uh-huh.
can then see clearly how that score is improving over time through the way that in which we can address those scores. That is all great ways that senior leadership and organizations can
Uh-huh.
actually measure what improvements they're making over that time, but in a language that goes from sort of base level users, if they're explaining that this is the human risk that you potentially may put to the organization, and this is why we need you to go through training, but
Uh-huh.
also certain other areas, the networks and areas on that front, we've seen that many access points hit in this way. We've now got a measurement to say that this is actually an area that we've improved in the last 6 months.
Nice. Awesome. And I'm sure you can attest to the fact that it also reduces fear to a certain extent, right? Because as humans, we tend to fear what we don't understand. And by having this clearer, easy to understand language, which is also, conveniently easy to remember with the great acronym that you came up with, that also helps them to have these better conversations at a board level, as you said, develop clear ownership, understand what these alerts that keep coming in mean as well. So that
Yeah, it
gives them
takes
that sense
guesswork
of
out of it.
agency. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely, and hopefully sort of provides them some clarity.
Of course. All right. So, in closing, last but certainly not least, the question that I have for you here is if a business listening or watching today realizes that they don't, in fact, know what their weakest link is or where they're most exposed, what would you say should be their first step?
I think the first thing that I'd probably say is don't buy another tool just yet. Understand your gaps, and sort of really assess where you're at. And that is the general sort of place to it. Go and evaluate where your business is currently sat. So what tools have you put in place? What protections have you invested in? What are the processes to make those work? And something here at Babel, what we I've put together is a cybersecurity snapshot. And with that
Okay.
snapshot, we can go through some very sort of base questions that can start to lead you down that path of, okay, this is how we approach that particular area. Are our people that weak point for us? Do we need to go and look at a certain strategy on that path? And we can give you a bit of a scale on how you could answer those questions. And ultimately, that would give us a bit of a direction to help you in the future.
Nice. Love that. And it's funny that you gave the same advice as Mark O'Dell, who, as you know, was on the previous episode. The first thing that he said was, don't go out and buy more tools. I love that we are all aligned here at Babel. So the snapshot will be definitely made available in the description below. So do check
Great.
that out
Yeah.
as well.
Really good.
But yes, that brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you so much, Adam, for your time. It's been a pleasure speaking to you today.
Likewise, Lynn. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. That's a wrap on today's episode of The Hidden Podcast. If this episode gave you an aha moment that helped you untangle something that's been bugging you, subscribe and share it with a friend who's in the same boat. And if you're wondering where you stand across the 6 hidden layers, try our cybersecurity snapshot in the description below. It's a lot less painful than a breach. Until next time, don't let your risks stay hidden.